You think you know the story of Charlie Bucket. You think you know the story of Willy Wonka and his magical, impossible chocolate factory. It is one of the most beloved children's stories of all time. A tale of a poor, virtuous boy who wins a golden ticket and inherits a kingdom of candy. It's a story of wonder, of imagination, of dreams coming true. Rivers of chocolate, everlasting gobstoppers, three-course dinner chewing gum, flying glass elevators. But the story you know is a lie. It is a bright, candy-coated shell hiding a core of profound darkness. A carefully constructed fantasy that serves to obscure a horrific historical truth. Because Roald Dahl's tale is not a whimsical invention. It is a coded message. It is a bitter, savage satire documenting the real-world brutality of the Industrial Revolution. Once you understand the history of the British confectionery industry, you will realise that Willy Wonka's factory is not a place of magic. It is a slaughterhouse. Once you learn about the lives of Victorian factory workers, you will see that the naughty children are not caricatures. They are case studies of industrial death and dismemberment. The story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is not about candy. It is about capitalism in its most naked and ruthless form. It is a crime scene, preserved in the amber of a children's narrative. And Willy Wonka is not the hero. He is the monster. To understand the code, we must first look past the whimsy and examine the text itself. Roald Dahl was a master of macabre detail, and his descriptions of the fates of the 4 bad children are startlingly precise and unflinchingly grim. We've been conditioned to read them as comedy, as just desserts for gluttony, gum chewing, and greed. But read them again. Read them with a forensic eye. Take Augustus Gloop. He falls into the chocolate river and is sucked up a glass pipe. The Oompa Loompas sing a jaunty song about turning him into fudge. It seems absurd. But listen to Wonka's reaction. It is not concern, it is not panic, it is cold, industrial logic. He says, he'll be altered a bit. He'll be quite thin when he comes out. This is not the language of fantasy. This is the language of industrial processing. Augustus is no longer a boy. He is raw material. Consider Violet Beauregard. She chews an experimental piece of gum and swells into a giant blueberry. Her skin turns purple, her body distends. Again, the Oompa Loompas sing. Wonka's primary concern is not her health, but the integrity of his product. It always goes wrong when we get to the dessert. It's the blueberry pie that does it. He speaks of her condition as a predictable, albeit unfortunate, manufacturing defect. She is a failed experiment, a piece of spoiled goods to be dejuiced. Then there is Veruca Salt. Thrown down a garbage chute by squirrels trained to spot bad nuts. Wonka's commentary is chilling. When Mr. Salt asks if the chute leads to the incinerator, Wonka replies, "Oh, that's just a rumour. They only light it every other day." The possibility of a child being burned alive is treated as a joke, a matter of scheduling. And finally, Mike TV. He is dematerialised, transmitted by television, and reassembled as a tiny figure, inches tall. He is literally broken down into his constituent parts and put back together wrong. Wonka's solution? To put him in a stretching machine, a device that sounds suspiciously like a medieval rack. It might stretch him a bit too much, he muses. We've never had a human in there before. These are not funny accidents. They are graphic, systematic punishments. Each child's fate is a direct, physical consequence of their interaction with a piece of Wonka's industrial machinery. The factory is not a playground that happens to be dangerous. It is a meticulously designed system that maims, transforms, and disposes of human beings. And it does so with the cheerful, sociopathic indifference of its owner. This is our first clue. The story's internal logic is not one of magic, but of brutal industrial consequence. To understand why Dahl would write such a thing, you have to understand the world he was channeling. You have to leave the bright colours of the movie adaptations behind and step into the soot-stained, gas-lit world of 19th and early 20th century Britain. Picture it. The age of steam and steel. An era of unprecedented wealth and innovation, built on a foundation of human misery. This was the era of the great chocolate barons: Cadbury, Fry, Rowntree. These names are now synonymous with wholesome family treats. But the industry they pioneered was, in its infancy, as dangerous and exploitative as any coal mine or textile mill. The Victorian factory was a new circle of hell. There were no safety guards on machinery, no workers' compensation, no meaningful regulations. The air was thick with sugar. Dust that clogged the lungs, a condition known as candy maker's lung. Floors were slick with grease and syrup, and the central features of these factories were enormous open vats. These vats held hundreds of gallons of boiling liquid, molten chocolate, scalding caramel, bubbling sugar solutions heated to hundreds of degrees. They were often sunk into the floor or stood waist-high, with narrow, slippery walkways between them. They were, in essence, industrial-sized cooking pots. And workers, many of them children, toiled around them for 12 to 14 hours a day. Now let's return to Augustus Gloop. The story tells us he was a gluttonous boy who fell into a river of chocolate. We laugh at the absurdity. But in the historical record, this is no joke. Falling into vats was a terrifyingly common form of death in food processing and industrial plants. Consider the case of a worker at a London sugar refinery in 1887, reported in the newspapers of the day. He was skimming impurities from the surface of a massive vat of boiling syrup when he lost his footing on the greasy plank. There was no railing. He fell in. His co-workers heard a single scream, and then silence. By the time they could drain the vat, there was little left of him to recover. He had been, for all intents and purposes, cooked. This was not an isolated incident. All across the industrial world, similar stories unfolded with sickening regularity. Men, women, and children were boiled in vats of soap, beer, dye, and tallow. In 1919, in Boston, a massive storage tank of molasses burst, sending a 25-foot-high wave of thick, sticky syrup through the streets at 35 miles per hour. It killed 21 people, some of whom were crushed, but others were simply engulfed and suffocated, their bodies found days later, entombed in hardening sugar. This is the reality behind Augustus Gloop. His fall into the chocolate river is not a fantasy. It is a direct, literal depiction of one of the most gruesome forms of industrial death imaginable. Imagine you are a 10-year-old boy named Thomas, working in a confectionery in 1890s Manchester. You have been on your feet since before dawn, your small body aching with fatigue. Your job is to stir a vast copper cauldron of boiling sugar. The heat is immense, blistering your face. The air is so thick with steam and sugar dust, you can barely breathe. You are paid a few pennies a day, and you are always hungry. The smell of the candy is a constant torment. You lean over the vat, your arms burning with the effort of pushing the heavy wooden paddle. You glance around. The foreman is at the other end of the floor. You just want one taste. You dip your finger into the scalding mixture, a foolish, desperate act. The pain is instant and searing. You cry out, recoiling, and your worn-out shoe slips on a patch of spilled syrup on the floor. You fall. There is no magical pipe to suck you to safety. There is no jaunty song. There is only the all-consuming liquid fire of the boiling sugar. You are not turned into fudge, you are dissolved. This is the truth of Augustus Gloop. He is not a symbol of gluttony, he is a ghost. He is the ghost of every worker who was swallowed by the very machines they were forced to serve. Wonka's factory isn't a magical place where a fat kid gets his comeuppance. It is a historically accurate model of a death trap, and Augustus Gloop is its first, most literal victim. Dahl didn't invent this horror. He simply reported it, hiding the gruesome reality behind the thinnest possible veil of fantasy. The horror, however, does not end with industrial accidents. The products themselves were often just as dangerous as the process of making them. Which brings us to Violet Beauregard. Violet's transformation is one of the story's most memorable images. A gum-chewing girl who turns into a giant human blueberry. It's bizarre, comical, and seemingly pure fantasy. But like the chocolate river, the three-course dinner chewing gum has its roots in a dark and specific chapter of industrial history, the widespread adulteration of food. In the 19th century, there were virtually no laws governing food purity. Unscrupulous manufacturers were free to add cheap and often toxic bulking agents and colorants to their products to increase their profits. This was not a matter of a little harmless corner cutting. This was chemical warfare waged against an unsuspecting public. Chalk was added to flour. Sawdust was added to bread. Used tea leaves were re-dried and coloured with sheep's dung. But the most dangerous adulterations were in confectionery. The bright, alluring colours of Victorian sweets were often achieved with deadly poisons. Vibrant greens were made with copper arsenite, a compound containing arsenic. Bright reds were created using lead oxide or mercury sulfide. Yellows came from lead chromate. These were not trace amounts. The poisons were a primary ingredient. A single sweet could contain a lethal dose. Let's look again at Violet. She chews the gum. The first course, tomato soup, is fine. The second, roast beef, is fine. But when it gets to the dessert, blueberry pie and ice cream, something goes wrong. Her face starts to turn a violent, terrible purple. Her whole body begins to swell. She becomes, in effect, a giant berry. This is not magic. This is a clinically precise description of acute poisoning. The discoloration of the skin, the bloating and swelling of the body, these are classic symptoms. The story frames it as a magical transformation into a blueberry, but Dahl is, in fact, describing a child being poisoned by the food she is eating. The blueberry pie in the gum isn't just a flavour, it's a metaphor for the toxic colouring agent that has contaminated the product. The most infamous case of candy poisoning occurred in Bradford, England, in 1858. A confectioner named William Hardacre was making peppermint humbugs. The recipe called for sugar and gum arabic, but also a sugar substitute known as daff, which was essentially powdered gypsum or plaster of Paris. It was a common, if deceptive, adulterant. Hardacre sent his assistant to a local pharmacy to buy 12 pounds of daff. The pharmacist, who was ill, delegated the task to his young, inexperienced apprentice. The apprentice, confused, went into the storeroom and retrieved 12 pounds of what he thought was daff. It was not. It was arsenic trioxide. Hardacre mixed the 12 pounds of arsenic into 40 pounds of sugar and sold the poisoned humbugs all over Bradford's market. Within days, people began to fall violently ill. Over 200 people were poisoned, and more than 20 died, most of them children. The symptoms were horrific: vomiting, convulsions, and a strange bluish tint to the skin. This is the historical reality that underpins Violet Beauregard's fate. Her transformation is not a whimsical punishment for bad manners. It is a symbolic reenactment of the Bradford sweet poisoning and countless other incidents like it. She is a stand-in for every child who was sickened or killed by the very treats that were supposed to bring them joy. Imagine a little girl named Mary, walking through a bustling market in Victorian London. She has a penny, a rare treasure. She spends it on a brightly coloured sweet, a vibrant purple that looks like a jewel. She pops it in her mouth. It tastes sweet, slightly metallic. Later that day, she feels a cramping in her stomach. Her skin begins to feel hot and tight. Her parents watch in horror as a strange bluish-purple colour spreads across her face and body. They don't understand. They can't know that the beautiful colour was a lie, a disguise for a deadly poison. They can only watch as their daughter swells and sickens, a victim of an unregulated industry's greed. When Wonka orders the Oompa Loompas to take Violet to the juicing room, he says, "We've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately. After that, we'll see." He is not talking about saving her. He is talking about damage control. He is containing a failed product batch. Violet is not a naughty girl who gets a comical punishment. She is a victim of corporate negligence, a casualty of a dangerous and unregulated product. Dahl simply took the historical truth of children being poisoned by candy and wrapped it in the fantastic imagery of a girl turning into a fruit. The factory's system of punishment is not limited to physical harm. It also functions as a tool of class warfare. This becomes brutally clear when we examine the fate of Veruca Salt. Veruca is the spoiled, wealthy girl who gets everything she wants. Her father is a rich industrialist himself, the owner of a peanut shelling business. In the world of the factory, Veruca's sin is not gluttony or bad manners, but entitlement. She demands one of Wonka's specially trained squirrels, and when she is denied, she tries to take one for herself. The squirrels, we are told, are trained to test nuts, tapping them to see if they are good or bad. When Veruca enters their room, they swarm her, pin her down, tap her on the head, and declare her a bad nut. They then push her down a garbage chute. Her horrified parents follow her down. On the surface, this seems like a simple morality lesson about greed. But look closer at the symbolism. Who are the agents of Veruca's downfall? It is not Wonka himself. It is his workforce. The squirrels are the labourers of the nut room. They are the ones who perform the work, who judge the quality of the product. And in this moment, they turn their judgment upon the daughter of the ruling class. Veruca's fall is a moment of proletarian justice. She, who has never worked a day in her life, is suddenly subjected to the brutal logic of the factory floor. She is assessed not by her wealth or status, but by her intrinsic quality, and she is found wanting. She is judged to be bad, hollow, worthless, and like any defective product or piece of industrial waste, she is discarded. The garbage chute is the key. Where does it lead? As Wonka chillingly jokes, it may lead to the incinerator. The incinerator is the final destination for all the factory's refuse. In this act, the story makes a powerful and terrifying statement about class. The squirrels, the workers, are treating the rich girl as garbage, as something to be thrown away and burned. This is a stark reversal of the real-world power dynamic of the Industrial Revolution. In the real factories of the 19th century, it was the workers who were treated as disposable, as human refuse. They were the ones who were maimed by machines and then cast aside with no compensation. They were the ones whose bodies were broken by labour and then left to die in poverty. Imagine the world outside Wonka's gates. A world where the owner of a factory lives in a mansion, his daughter draped in furs, while the children who work for him live in squalid tenements, suffering from malnutrition and disease. The owner sees his workers not as people, but as components, as disposable units of labour. If a child loses a hand in a machine, he is fired and replaced the next day. He is, in effect, thrown on the scrap heap. Veruca's fate is the inversion of this reality. It is a fantasy of revenge. For one brief, shocking moment, the roles are reversed. The worker judges the owner. The powerless condemn the powerful. The girl who represents the pinnacle of capitalist privilege is treated like the trash that the system generates every single day. Her father, Mr. Salt, is also condemned. He, a fellow factory owner, is powerless to save his daughter. He tries to reason with Wonka, to appeal to him as a peer, but Wonka is indifferent. The factory has its own rules, its own brutal justice. When Mr. and Mrs. Salt follow Veruca down the chute, entire bourgeois family is consumed by the system. They are swallowed by the same industrial process that creates their wealth, judged and disposed of by the very labour they would normally exploit. Dahl is not just punishing a bratty child, he is symbolically dismantling the class structure. Veruca Salt's fall into the incinerator chute is a fantasy of revolution, a grim, coded depiction of the upper classes being consumed by the garbage disposal system of their own creation. It's the story of a world where the workers finally decide that the bosses, too, are bad nuts. If the first three children represent the physical and social dangers of the 19th century factory, the fourth, Mike TV, represents a more modern psychological horror, the dehumanizing effect of technology and mass production. Mike is a child of the post-war era, obsessed with television. His punishment is the most technologically advanced in the factory. He enters the television chocolate room, where Wonka has invented a method of sending a chocolate bar through the airwaves. Mike, in his arrogance, insists on being the first human to be sent. He is dematerialized, broken down into millions of tiny particles, and reassembled on the other side of the room, but only a few inches tall. This is often interpreted as a simple critique of television, a common complaint of the era. But the symbolism runs much deeper. It speaks to the core anxieties of the industrial age about the fragmentation of the human being. Think about the assembly line, a system perfected in the early 20th century. The goal of the assembly line and the scientific management theories of men like Frederick Winslow Taylor was to increase efficiency by breaking down complex tasks into their smallest, most repetitive components. A worker would no longer craft an entire product. Instead, he would spend his entire day turning a single screw or pulling a single lever over and over again. This process, incredibly efficient, but it was also profoundly dehumanizing. It reduced the worker to a cog in a vast, impersonal machine. It fragmented their skills, their focus, and ultimately, their sense of self. They were no longer craftsmen. They were biological robots, performing a single, mindless task. Their humanity was, in a very real sense, disassembled. Mike TV's journey through the television is a literal, visual metaphor for this process. He is broken down into a million tiny pieces. He is reduced from a whole person into a collection of particles, transmitted and then reassembled. The process is a success from a technical standpoint. He arrives on the other side. But the result is a grotesque distortion. He is a person, but he is diminished, shrunken, a pale imitation of his former self. He has been successfully processed by the machine, and in doing so, has lost his essential human scale. Wonka's proposed solution is just as revealing. He suggests the Oompa Loompas take Mike to the taffy pulling and stretching room. It's a great big machine that stretches them out, he explains. The imagery is torturous. Mike is to be put on a rack, stretched back into shape like a piece of candy. This is the logic of the factory applied to the human body. If a part is the wrong size, you don't heal it, you mechanically force it into the correct dimensions. This reflects a deep-seated fear about industrial society, that in our quest to master technology and production, we would end up applying the brutal mechanics of the factory to ourselves. That we would become so obsessed with efficiency and standardization that we would start to see people as just another set of components to be measured, manipulated, and forced into compliance. Imagine a worker on Henry Ford's first assembly lines. Let's call him Frank. Before the line, Frank was a mechanic who understood how an entire engine worked. He had a skill, a craft. Now, his entire world has shrunk to 2 square feet of floor space. His only job is to tighten 3 specific bolts on the engine block as it passes him every 93 seconds. For 8 hours a day, he does nothing else. He is no longer a mechanic. He is a human wrench. He feels himself shrinking, his mind numbing, his world reducing to the scale of those 3 bolts. He has been broken down into a single, repetitive function. Mike TV is Frank. He is every worker whose humanity was fragmented and diminished by the relentless logic of the assembly line. His fate is not a warning against watching too much TV. It is a profound and disturbing commentary on the way industrial processes can break down the human spirit, reducing a person to a set of manageable, manipulable parts. So we have a series of accidents that are not accidents at all. We have a child boiled alive, a child poisoned, a child treated as industrial waste, and a child disassembled by technology. The factory is a machine for destroying children. But why? And who are the cheerful, singing labourers who carry out these grim tasks? To answer that, we must confront the darkest secret of the chocolate industry and the most controversial aspect of Dahl's book, the Oompa Loompas. In the original 1964 edition of the book, the Oompa Loompas are not the whimsical, orange-skinned, green-haired figures from the movies. Roald Dahl's description is very specific and very disturbing. He describes them as a tribe of African pygmies that Willy Wonka discovered in the very deepest and darkest part of the African jungle. Wonka tells a story of finding them living in tree houses, starving and eating caterpillars. He offers them a deal. If they will leave their home, travel to his country, and live and work in his factory, he will pay them in their favourite food, cacao beans. They agree. Wonka, by his own admission, smuggles them into Britain, imported direct from Africa, and they are now the sole workforce of his factory. Let's be clear about what this is. This is a story of a white industrialist travelling to a colonised land, finding a tribe of indigenous people and removing them from their homes to work in his factory for no wages other than payment in a raw commodity which he controls. This is not a charming fantasy. This is a textbook description of colonialism and indentured servitude bordering on slavery. The cacao bean, the currency of the Oompa Loompas, is the raw ingredient for chocolate. The history of the European chocolate trade is inextricably linked to the history of slavery and colonial exploitation. For centuries, the demand for sugar and cocoa in Europe was met by the brutal labour of enslaved Africans on plantations in the Americas and later in Africa itself. The great Quaker chocolate companies of Britain, like Cadbury and Rowntree's, built their benevolent reputations on being ethical employers at home. But in the early 20th century, were confronted with a horrifying truth. The cocoa they were buying from Portuguese colonies like São Tomé and Príncipe was being harvested by enslaved people, captured from the Angolan mainland and subjected to conditions of unimaginable cruelty. Journalists and investigators reported that the death rate on these plantations was astronomical. Labourers were worked to death, dying of disease, starvation and abuse. This was the true cost of the chocolate that filled the sweet shops of London and Birmingham. Dahl, writing in the post-colonial era, takes this hidden history and places it right at the centre of his story. The Oompa Loompas are the ghosts of the millions of enslaved and exploited people whose labour fueled the industrial empires of Europe. They are not happy workers. They are a captive workforce. They live inside the factory. They never leave. They are paid in a currency that has no value outside the factory walls. A classic tactic of the truck system used to trap workers in debt and dependency. Their songs, which we remember as funny and moralizing, take on a much darker tone in this context. They are not singing because they are happy. They are singing like prisoners, like a chain gang. Their songs are a form of gallows humour, a grim commentary on the fate of the outsiders who fall victim to the factory's machinery. They sing because it is their job. They are performing for their master. The public outcry over the racist depiction of the Oompa Loompas eventually forced Dahl to revise the book. In later editions, they were rewritten to be from the fantastical Loompaland, with white skin and golden hair. But this revision doesn't erase the original intent. It simply sanitizes it. The original text reveals the truth. Wonka's magical factory is built upon the foundation of colonial exploitation. His wondrous creations are made possible by the labour of a displaced, captive people. This brings us to the architect of this entire system, Willy Wonka himself. Who is this man? The story presents him as an eccentric genius, a magical figure. But if we strip away the fantasy, who is he really? He is a paranoid, secretive industrialist. He is a capitalist who fires his entire workforce and replaces them with cheaper, more pliable labour. He is a factory owner whose workplace maims and kills. He uses corporate espionage, sending spies to infiltrate his rivals like Slugworth and Fickelgruber. He operates a closed, fortress-like factory from which no information escapes. Willy Wonka is not a fantasy character. He is a brutally accurate caricature of the 19th century tycoon, the robber baron. He has the paternalistic charm of a George Cadbury, combined with the ruthless paranoia of a Henry Ford, and the exploitative labour practices of a King Leopold II. The story of him closing his factory and firing all his workers because of spies is presented as a tragic necessity. But think about it from the workers' perspective. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people are put out of work overnight, with no warning and no safety net because of the owner's paranoia about trade secrets. This was a real and constant fear for industrial workers. Their livelihoods were entirely at the mercy of the whims and rivalries of the men who owned the machines. The real-life chocolate industry was rife with this kind of paranoia. Recipes were zealously guarded secrets. Industrial espionage was rampant. Companies sent spies disguised as workers to steal the techniques of their rivals. Rowntree's, for example, had an employee who they sent to work at a rival Swiss firm for months to learn the secret of their milk chocolate. The idea of Wonka's fortress is not whimsical. It's a reflection of the cutthroat nature of the business. Wonka's genius is not magical, it is industrial. His inventions, the everlasting gobstopper, the three-course dinner chewing gum, are triumphs of food science and chemical engineering. But his true genius lies in his perfection of the capitalist system. He has achieved what every industrialist dreams of: a factory with no labour disputes, no wage demands, and no government oversight. A closed loop of production and exploitation, powered by a captive workforce hidden from the eyes of the world. This is the sanitization arc. Roald Dahl took the entire brutal history of the Industrial Revolution, the child labour, the horrific accidents, the poisonous products, the class warfare, the colonial exploitation, and he sanitized it. He disguised it as a children's story. He used the language of fantasy to make the unbearable truth palatable. The mother of Augustus Gloop is a worried parent, not the grieving widow of a man boiled in caramel. Violet Beauregard's father is a blustering car salesman, not a man watching his child die from arsenic poisoning. Veruca Salt's punishment is a funny comeuppance, not a horrifying fantasy of revolutionary violence. We are invited to laugh at these children and their fates. We are encouraged to see them as deserving of their punishments. And in doing so, we become complicit in Wonka's system. We adopt his cold, industrial logic. We agree that these children are bad nuts who need to be disposed of. Dahl's ultimate trick is to make the reader into an Oompa Loompa, singing along cheerfully as the horrors unfold. And this leads us to the final, most chilling part of the story, Charlie Bucket. Charlie is the hero. He is poor, but he is good. He is humble, starving, and virtuous. He is the one child who survives the factory tour unscathed. And in the end, he is rewarded. Wonka declares him the winner and names him as his heir. Charlie inherits the entire chocolate factory. This is presented as the ultimate happy ending. The good boy gets his reward. It is a classic rags to riches fairy tale. But seen through the lens of our deconstruction, it is something far more sinister. Charlie's victory is not a triumph of good over evil. It is the perpetuation of the system. The story is not a critique of the brutal capitalist system that Wonka has created. It is a fantasy about how to inherit it. The lesson is not that the factory is a monstrous place that should be dismantled. The lesson is that if you are obedient, quiet, and unquestioning enough, you might one day get to be the one who runs it. Charlie doesn't challenge Wonka. He doesn't recoil in horror as the other children are maimed and brutalized. He remains passive, wide-eyed, and compliant. He wins not by being heroic, but by being invisible. He is the perfect future manager, the one who will not question the fundamental cruelty of the system he is about to take over. His prize is the ultimate capitalist myth. It is the lie sold to millions of workers throughout history. The idea that the system isn't broken, that you don't need to tear it down, because if you just work hard and keep your head down, you, or your child, might one day be the one at the top. It is the lottery ticket that keeps the masses from revolting. Charlie is the 1 in a billion exception that is used to justify the suffering of all the others. For every Charlie who inherits the factory, there are thousands of Augustuses who are boiled in the vats, thousands of Violets who are poisoned by the products, and millions of Oompa Loompas who toil in captivity. Charlie's success does not redeem the system, it validates it. He is not a savior, he is the successor. He will become the next Wonka. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is not a bedtime story. It is a manual of industrial horror, a political cartoon of savage intensity. It is a guided tour through a museum of capitalist atrocities, where each exhibit is a punished child. The book endures, not because of its whimsy, but because of the terrifying truth it conceals. It taps into a deep, collective cultural memory of the violence and exploitation of these Wonka. Industrial age. The fantasy is merely the sugarcoating on a very bitter pill. The story's true power lies in the darkness it struggles to contain. It's not a tale about a boy who gets a chocolate factory. It's a tale about a system that consumes children, and the one quiet boy who learned the rules well enough to one day become the one in charge of the machine. The golden ticket was never an invitation to a world of pure imagination. It was a job application for the position of chief executioner.